Hey everyone, welcome to my tier list for patch 2.3a. I have updated it, I've made improvements to the tier list, and what we're going to do now is we're just going to quickly explain what some of the things that you're seeing on your screen mean, and then we are going to zone in on certain lanes and talk about them individually so that you can see the tier list a little bit more easily, and also it won't be so small on your phone screens. I will provide a link to a tweet in the description below where I have tweeted this tier list out. If you want to go and download the image, you absolutely can. And the downloaded image you'll be able to zoom in on and do whatever you like. I'll also provide at the end of a video a wide screenshot so that you're able to screenshot the video screen and then also do the same thing. First of all, thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. There is a reference link in the description below. Secondly, like, comment, and also subscribe, and you have a chance for winning 10 skins or one of 10 skins in June. But in July the 1st, I'll do the draw as I always do, and I'll post the video as an unlisted video so you can go and see how it's done. But just make sure you leave a comment, puts you in with a good stand. Right, let's look at the explanation of this tier list then. So, if a champion has a green border, it is a good champion in all situations. And what that means is you can blind pick it, and for the most part, it will fit the majority of team compositions that your team is going to want to run. If you are worried in solo queue about team comps, you will know that a green ring pick or a green border pick is going to be good for most situations. A red border means that this champion has quite a high skill cap, and to play effectively, you need to be a good player to use it. Also, playing against a player that is particularly good at this champion can be quite punishing, and that can be quite difficult for a lot of players to deal with. A yellow pick means you might see this, or a yellow border means you might see this in competitive, but you're probably not going to see as much of it in solo queue, but it is rated higher because it is a competitive pick. And therefore, we have to give that pick justice because pro players value it in competitive situations. All right, now we're going to talk about the rune choice graphics. And there's a little Lux picture in your top left-hand corner right now that will describe what the rune choice is and why they're positioned on the portraits and what it actually means. The bottom left rune is the rune that is used in most situations. The top left rune is the rune that is sometimes used in certain situations or as a personal preference, and the rune on the top right is a rune that is often used in specific scenarios or for different types of builds, of which if there are any important ones I will describe those when we go through the tier list. Some updates that I want to do from the last tier list: I have changed some colors around so it's not as confusing. I've made the background black so it's easier to see. I've added the rune choices, and I'm going to zoom in on each lane individually. Some updates for the next video, for the next tier list, is I'm going to try and add a way of adding like tank, AD, AP, that type of thing into the tier list. And finally, talking about the classification of champions, S means very good. And the higher they are up in the S category, the closer they are to being OP. So S is like your very good champions, and the higher they are up, the better they are. So in general, you want to read the tier lists from top to bottom, with the champions at the top being the best and the champions at the bottom being the worst. Champions on the left are the ones that I think are ever so slightly better than champions on the right. So really you go top, down, left to right, like you are reading a book, and that's generally how you read the tier list. Although I do know some other cultures read their books the other way around, but let's say you're reading an English book, top down, left to right. A means a good pick, B means an okay pick, and C means I would not recommend playing this unless you are particularly good with that champion, or for some reason or another you think it's into a good counter matchup. So right, let's get into the Baron lane now. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on the Baron lane, and we're going to focus on the Baron lane to begin with. Not much has changed. And when I say not much, I mean absolutely nothing has changed realistically in the Baron lane. But what I have added is the runes for all of the champions that you could be playing in this position. So Fiora still, I think, the best Baron laner in the game. Fiora with Grasp of the Undying is disgusting to play against. But honestly, the Barmy Cinders nerfs, they really didn't mean anything for Garen and Gragas tank. Like they both did not need that 25% damage to push the lane harder than they already did. Like Garen spins the lane into oblivion in the early game anyway, and Gragas can clear the lane effectively anyway. So Fiora, Gragas, and Garen, in my opinion, still the best Baron laners in the game. Fiora definitely super, super good, but Garen and Gragas also brilliant. I've moved Renekton over to where Camille was. I think Camille's better played in the jungle right now. she can very easily be played in the Baron lane. But Renekton, I've played with a lot of Renektons that are really popping off with the Blade of the Ruined King into the Black Cleaver build. It's very, very strong. And it's actually a build that I think a lot of Renektons are kind of seeing ways to carry games with. So I think that's the build that I would be considering. Other than that, the Baron lane is relatively similar. Darius, Pantheon, Akali, Wukong. The Wukong buffs, in my opinion, still didn't really make him that much better in the Baron lane. I think he's decent, and I think maybe I'm undervaluing a little bit. I would call him maybe a sleeper OP pick, but... yeah, I think for the most part, nothing major changing here. Riven, Lee Sin, who has popped into the Baron lane. Obviously, people starting to pick him up from the PC version. Kennen is actually still a decent pick too. Think Irelia is probably better in the Baron lane than I'm giving her credit for, but only in certain matchups. I think she's got a lot of really bad matchups, really bad matchups in the Baron lane. And I think that can make it quite difficult for her to play, and I do think she's better placed in the mid lane. Now, let's go down a little bit and have a look at some of the picks at the lower. So let's have a look. B tier, still things like the Olafs, the Jaxes, the Jarvans, they're all fine picks. Like Nasus is okay, especially at low elo. If anything, at low elos, the Nasus is a great pick because people don't know how to lane properly, and you can kind of farm your way to victory. I still think Yasuo is better placed in mid lane right now. Again, similar to Irelia, has a lot of bad matchups into tanks and beefy members in the top side of the map. Vayne, pretty decent. Again, in the hands of a one trick can be very scary. Teemo is quite, like, Teemo wins a lot of Baron lane matchups. I know you probably think I'm crapping on Teemo here, but Teemo wins a lot of Baron lane matchups, but it's not really the laning phase where Teemo's, like, are problematic. It's the fact that he doesn't really do anything after the laning phase. You know, like, the meta is kind of filled with tanks and hard CC and engage right now, and Teemo struggles to deal with that, and that's what makes Teemo kind of meh. Dr. Mundo and, of course, Tryndamere kind of poopy. Okay, let's take a look at the jungle now, and the Eve nerfs obviously hit her a little bit, but realistically the way that I view this is if Eve was having to use her ultimate to steal objectives, you were probably already not in control anyway. Those nerfs that happened in the last patch did not affect Eve's ability to snowball and carry games. They affected her ability to potentially make a last minute steal and potentially turn the game with getting an Elder Dragon or a Baron or something. But realistically, that didn't happen in most games that Evelynn was in. She basically secured a lot of objectives, and she could definitely steal objectives here and there. But for the most part, if you were that far behind, you were probably already losing most of the games that you played. Evelynn still snowballs really hard. Evelynn can still carry games single-handedly, and that makes her a still strong solo queue jungler. The fact that Evelynn can go invisible at level 5 and there is nothing to counteract that, there is no control wards or anything, because in League they have wards that can spot invisibility. That makes Evelynn ridiculously powerful in Wild Rift, and that probably will remain in the game for the foreseeable future, because there isn't really a way to counteract Evelynn's ability to get into the lane and gank you, and she can still obnoxiously one-shot you when you're at like 20% HP, so that doesn't really affect it. But Lee Sin is the best jungler in the meta. Lee Sin is absolutely the best jungler in the meta. He beats pretty much every jungle matchup. A good Lee Sin player. I really should have had a red ring round Lee Sin as well, because he is for skilled players, but he's also good in every scenario. So like Lee Sin is just like a great blind pick jungler. He's the best jungler in the meta. He beats pretty much every other jungler on this list. But below Lee Sin, the other 4 big jungle picks haven't really changed. Camille, Renekton, Fizz, and Evelynn are still very strong solo queue junglers. Then you'll find the likes of Wukong, Vi, and Jarvan. They see a little bit more value in competitive and the way that teams coordinate. But in solo queue, they're still great picks. I've moved Xin Zhao up to A tier. I've played a bit of him, and I actually think he is pretty solid now. I think people are just not really giving him the chance because, you know, people kind of have this they're set in their ways about the meta. But he's kind of on the same tier as things like Olaf and Gragas jungle and Renekton, sorry, not Renekton, Rengar and Pantheon. Riven and Shyvana, like Shyvana, I feel like I'm doing Shyvana a little bit dirty here, but she's been hit with so many nerfs. She doesn't feel particularly strong to play right now. Let's have a little bit look further down the list. Okay, if we have a little look further down the list, you'll see things like the Amumu, the Rammus, the Jax, the Graves. Phase Rush didn't really help Graves out, by the way. It hasn't really made him that much stronger. Diana and Mundo, still kind of okay junglers, and then Tryndamere. Now, you may wonder why I haven't put Master Yi on here. It's because I couldn't make the tier list look pretty and put Master Yi far enough down into the dustbin. However, I'm going to say it audibly. Master Yi is a decent jungler, and in fact, I played a game with the rank 1 jungler on Europe who played Master Yi, and we forced the enemy to FF at 6 minutes. So Master Yi can be viable, and he is definitely viable at low elos. However, spamming Master Yi and trying to use Master Yi as a way to get better at the game is not going to work the higher elos you go, because a load of junglers can really shut down Master Yi. And even if you get Master Yi to late game, he is super weak to a lot of the hard CC and hard crowd control in the meta. I spam Braum, for instance. Braum is my favorite support to play, and he absolutely donks on Master Yi. Like, Master Yi becomes useless versus a Braum sometimes because the amount of chain CC you can throw on him, and Master Yi does not build particularly tanky. Like, if you're going to meditate, you stun him. He runs at your carry, you stun him once he comes out of Alpha Strike, you knock him up. It's very difficult to play Master Yi effectively. Anyway, rant over. Let's move on to the mid lane. Okay, let's move on to the mid lane now. And honestly, I've changed things up a little bit here. You may wonder what I've changed. I've changed the fact that Diana was the best mid laner. The more and more I've talked to a lot of mid laners, the more and more I've kind of realized that there isn't really a mid laner that is OP right now. There's not like a super OP mid laner. For the most part, mid laners are pretty good across the board. There are, as you can see here, lots of what I consider S tier picks. Diana, Irelia, Akali, Ziggs, Twisted Fate, Orianna, Galio, and Corki, I would all consider very, very strong picks in the mid lane. Of course, I think Diana's still one of the best. However, she's not like distinctively further ahead than any of the other mid lane picks that you can get in the meta right now. Below that, you might notice that Katarina has dropped out of S tier. I've talked a lot of Katarina one tricks, and they have said that 10% damage nerf really did hurt their ability to kill people in team fights. Yes, of course, Katarina can snowball, but the way that they phrased it, and the way that one of my friends Doom phrased it, is that either you're a Katarina one trick, or she's just not that good anymore, or she's not OP anymore. So either you're a Katarina one trick and you can still make her work, or you're not a Katarina one trick and she's a bit more difficult to play. Ari, the nerf definitely hurt her, but not enough to say that she's not where she was previously. Like, she's still decent. Yasuo, I've moved up from my previous estimation because I do think that Yasuo is coming back into the meta a little bit, and he is strong. Zed is pretty decent too. Seraphine, a good mid laner. Gragas is okay. You especially see it over in Southeast Asia, and has some good matchups. Fizz, Kennen, Aurelion Sol, and Riven are all decent. Let's move down the list. Okay, let's take a look at the bottom of the list now. You can see Renekton, Pantheon, Annie, and then obviously Lux and Teemo. Like, Teemo, again, mid, not particularly strong because he has so many bad matchups into ranged matchups. The reason Teemo's so strong in Baron lane, or is stronger in Baron, and I still don't rate Teemo as a pick, is because he's very good into melee matchups. Like, he can really abuse melee matchups. Much more difficult to do that against ranged matchups, and there are a lot more ranged matchups in the mid lane, which makes Teemo more difficult to play here. Right, shall we have a look at the AD carry list? Okay, let's take a look at the AD carry list here. Not much changed, really. Kai'Sa and Ezreal, I still think are the best solo queue AD carries, with Xayah, Varus, and a Jinx below. I've put on Varus Summon Airy. Not a lot of people do realize this, but Summon Airy is the rune that a lot of Varus players use right now because of the hits build into his lethality build path. You poke in the laning phase with your first ability, your arrow, over and over again. I've moved Tristana up because she is being played quite a lot more over in Southeast Asia, especially in competitive, if you've been watching the competitive scene over there that's being broadcast on Twitch and on YouTube. I've moved Ashe up because I've played with a lot of Ashes in solo queue right now, and I do think Ashe is maybe stronger than I'm giving her credit for. But for the most part, the AD carry list hasn't changed a huge amount, and you won't notice any like meaningful differences because for the majority of games, especially at the higher elos, it's pretty much Kai'Sa Ezreal or Kai'Sa Xayah, Kai'Sa Jinx, Kai'Sa Varus, and sometimes you see a Draven. But apart from that, it's mostly dominated by Kai'Sa and Ezreal at the top ends of the table. Let's move down a little bit further. All right, you probably won't be surprised to see that the bottom end of the AD carry table hasn't changed much. Miss Fortune doesn't feel like she's got a particularly good place in the meta right now. Like, her ultimate's quite difficult to make work with a lot of the CC and dive that's in the meta. So, you know, as soon as you start to channel your ultimate, you become an absolute target. But she's still an okay and playable AD carry, especially at low elos. Ziggs is played in competitive, but not really that good in a uncoordinated solo queue team. You do need to have a little bit of coordination to play Ziggs as AD carry. So you either need to be playing in a duo or in a team. Same with Yasuo, to be honest with you. And then Twisted Fate. Please don't play Twisted Fate AD carry. I've been inted by so many of them. It makes me sad. All right, and support. Let's take a look at the support list. Braum, Janna, super, super strong. Like, Font of Life is a great rune right now, and especially because Braum abuses it so well. Nami with Font of Life is super strong. I've moved Galio up to the kind of like the A tier border. He's played a lot over in Southeast Asia and on the Asian servers, not as much over in Europe, but I do want to give credit that I'm trying to be quite holistic with this tier list, so I do believe Galio deserves a bit of a higher place. Leona's buffs, I don't think made her insane. I still think she's quite single target focused and not tanky enough to be like a true tank support, but otherwise, she's like a good solo queue support. Gragas and Blitzcrank are like they're relatively good answers into enchanters, especially if you go for the kind of the flash engage on the Gragas or you actually land a hook on the Blitzcrank, but otherwise can be a little weak to things like Braum, Alistair, the Gallios, for instance, but they're pretty good into enchanters, especially if you can find those engages. Let's have a look further down. And if we have a little look further down, you'll notice that Soraka with Font of Life actually might be sleeper OP, by the way. I played against a really annoying Soraka with Font of Life, and it was very difficult to play against. Pantheon, still like decent. I still don't rate Pantheon support massively highly. And then you know that I don't like these level 5 supports, like the Malphite and the Annie, who rely on being level 5 to actually have an impact, and I don't like that in the laning phase. It makes it quite difficult for the AD carry. Should we have a look at the entire tier list then, so you can take a screenshot? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, right, this is the whole tier list. You can take a screenshot, zoom in on it if you like. I'm hoping that this helped you kind of get grasp with the runes that are good, and kind of gives you a bit more of information. You can see it a bit better now that we zoomed in on each individual lane. And then obviously I've given you this image that you can screenshot, and once I put a tweet up, I will link it in the description below. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching. Not much changed, believe it or not, on 2.3a. The jungle changes don't seem to have shaken things up massively yet, although things might change, and of course if they do, I will update you. See you soon.